Hello everybody, I've come here today to take my 1960 Ford Falcon for a drive. Now this car has not been started for 12 months, sat here. As you can see, it's in the shed, cover's on, it's got all sorts of dirt on top of the cover, doesn't even have a battery in it. Brought a battery here with me. So what I'm going to do is going to get this cover off, get the battery in, and let's see if we can start this car. Start this car for the first time in 12 months. As you can see, this really is a magnificent car. I personally have owned this car for approaching 17, 18 years now. I'm the second owner and it is completely unrestored. Just have a look at this car. I just do not get time to drive this car and to give it the love that it deserves. But today, I'm going to start it for the first time in 12 months and hopefully we're going to take it for a bit of a drive. Bit of history on this car, 1960 Ford Falcon, made in the US as a prototype for the Australian market. I think they made about 900 of these for the Australian market as a prototype in the early 1960s. And this is one of them. Have a quick look under the bonnet. All I ever do to this car is maintenance. I want to keep it in this unrestored condition. Quick look, you can see last year I replaced the master cylinder, so it's got a new master cylinder, new old stock master cylinder on there. Year before I replaced the exhaust manifold. And a couple of years before that, you can see down here, it's got a new fuel pump. When I first got this car, some 17, 18 years ago, I actually rebuilt the carburetor myself. It's got a little Holly carburetor. And also, I had a recall done on the radiator. That's about 15, 16 years ago now. So as you can see, it's just basic maintenance that I do to this car. You see there's no battery in there. So I'm going to chuck this battery in here, do that just now, and we'll see if we can get this car running. So just looking at this is a negative earth car, so make sure we put the battery in so that the negative is on the negative side. Just check it's got plenty of coolant and oil before we try to start it. Alright folks, so what I'm going to do, I am literally going to pump the accelerator probably about 17 to 20 times, something like that. full choke. It's a manual choke on this car. And then I'll have my foot about 1/2 to 2/3 on the accelerator, and I'll just literally turn this engine over until it starts. Hopefully it will start. But yeah, let's jump in and we'll give it a go. There you go, folks. That's the first start in about 12 months on this 1960 Falcon. And just listen to that engine. Isn't that sweet? Have a look in here. I've just noticed we've got some fuel leaking out of the carburetor. So I'm going to do a shut it down before it gets hot. We'll see if we can address that issue. So folks, we simply can't leave this car with that fuel dripping out of the carburetor like that. So what we'll do is we'll get the air cleaner off, and then we'll go in for a closer inspection as to what the problem is with that fuel leaking. I really do suspect that there's a cork gasket on the front of that carburetor where the float bowl attaches to the carburetor, and what will have happened is that over time, you know, it's been 12 months since this car has run, that cork gasket will have dried out, and so what I'll need to do is slightly tighten those screws all around the front of the carburetor, and then hopefully that'll solve the problem, and then with a little bit of a run, that cork gasket will soak up the petrol and it will expand again. So let's get this off and let's have a closer look. Okay, so I've got the air cleaner off. You can see it's still leaking there. It's leaking straight at that fuel bowl there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a screwdriver. You can see it's got a cork gasket on the seal on the front of that float. That's a cork gasket which I would have actually made myself when I rebuilt this carburetor about 17 years ago. Would have made that out of cork. I remember cutting all of the gaskets by hand. I cut paper gaskets internally. I didn't buy a carburetor rebuild kit. So I'm just going to grab a screwdriver and let's see if we can tighten that up. So tightening those screws to the fuel bowl seems to have solved that problem. we can see there's no fuel dripping anymore. So let's just wait a little bit for the engine to dry out. It's got a bit of fuel around the place. All right, we've got that tightened up, so let's start her up again and see if she still leaks. Alright, you can see that seems to have solved the problem. There's no fuel leaking out of that carburetor. And you guys have seen this engine start. This engine has not run for 12 months, and just listen to that. Chokes out a little bit at the moment, but doesn't that engine sound sweet? I'll just jump back in the car in a moment, I'll push that choke in, and you can just hear that run. Listen to that, folks. Is that not a beauty? Listen to the way that engine's running. This engine is nearly 50 years old. To my knowledge, has never even had the head off of it. Like I said in the beginning, I've owned this car for about 17, 18 years myself. There's an original 71,000 miles, never restored. Folks, I just quickly shut that engine down because, as you can see, that carburetor is still leaking fuel. So what I'm going to do, I've tried to tighten it. I'm going to go and purchase a sheet of cork, and I'll get this float off. I'm going to try and get this float off today, and we'll cut a new gasket by hand, and let's see if we can get this running so it's not leaking fuel. So I'm back, and I've managed to purchase a roll of premium cork gasket and grabbed a Stanley knife. I'm not at home, so I've got quite limited tools where I actually store this vehicle. So got the cork gasket. It turns out it's much harder to purchase nowadays. 2 auto shops told me that they haven't made cars with carburetors for 20 years, so you don't need it. That didn't really help me. So anyway, third store I went to had a roll, had to buy a whole roll. You can see I've got something like 1.1 meters. But anyway, I really want to see if I can get this car running today. It's a gorgeous day. Love to go for a cruise, so I'll jump to it. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually take the old float seal off, the old gasket that's cut out of cork, and because I'm going to make a copy of the old one. So just undo these screws to the front of the float. What I'll do is I'll actually put them in the pattern on down here on the battery that they come out, just in case there's any slight differences. So I'll make sure I put the screws back in the same holes which they came out. Just put that rag there to catch any fuel that's going to come out as we take this float bowl off. Float bowl cover off. Yeah, that didn't really work. Bit of a close up. You can see that gasket is quite dry. It wouldn't help the fact that this car literally sits and doesn't get used very much. But like I said before, I know that I cut that gasket by hand, and that would have been some 16, 17 years ago now. So it's time for a new one. We've got the new material. Let's go make a copy of it. Just carefully trying to take that off so I don't break it as I take it off. And the reason is I want to make that copy as I talked about. Some of you may have watched the video which I did on the first start of the Datsun 620 Ute, which hadn't been started for 20 years. If you've seen that, you would have seen at the end of that video that it had a similar problem where that carburetor was leaking fuel out of the front of the float seal. So good job that I've got heaps of this cork. You can see I've got loads. I will, in another video at some stage, you'll see me make another gasket for that Datsun Ute when I intend to get it running. But I'm just waiting to go to the next stage with that Datsun Ute. I'm waiting for that 1,000 likes, folks. So jump onto that, click the link, jump onto that and watch that as well. And if you want to see me get that Datsun Ute driving, like that video. All right, let's cut this one out. Yeah. Obviously that's deformed as it's come out. That is way bigger than it needs to be. So I'm just going to trim off the excess because we don't really want that too big. All right, before we cut the inside out, I'm just going to check that for size on the carburetor. You can see on the float, looks pretty good, but let's go check it on the carburetor. All right, so, all right, width is going to be fine. Let's roughly check the height. Yeah, I reckon that's going to be good. So let's cut the center out. All right, so let's got that roughly cut out. Let's go check it for size on the carburetor. What do you think, folks? To be brutally honest, I think that's good enough. I'm going to pop that cover on for that float bowl and let's see if that does the job. What do you say? Should we fire her up and see if it still leaks? Now, because that float ball's now completely empty, you probably saw a bit of a rush of petrol came out when I took it off. It might have to crank for a little bit just to fill that up with fuel again. Let's see. Well, that certainly does look like it's not dripping now. I'll bring you in for a closer look. But that new cork gasket, that rubberized cork gasket I just bought and cut out by hand, seems to have done the trick. No petrol at all leaking into that carburetor now. That would have been a disaster if I'd driven this car, both with that petrol dripping down like it was onto that manifold. So that's the thing with these old cars. You really just got to be careful, got to be diligent, and you have to look out for the little problems. I'll just come push that choke in. I've still got the choke out. Let's push that choke in so you can really see how this car runs. Just show you the original mileage. I mentioned to you earlier, but 71,367 original miles on this 1960 Falcon. And just listen to it. Listen to that engine, just purring. Okay. Absolutely no fuel leak. That's good. Come around, have a look at the rear. Look at that. Beautiful. Okay. You find me a modern day plastic fantastic that will in 50, 60 years time will be able to sit for 12 months. Sit for 12 months, folks. And like that, it started up. Just bring a fully charged battery. I must confess, I did chuck that on my charger overnight. Come with a fully charged battery and start just like that. Yes, had that slight issue with the carburetor, but with the screwdriver, Stanley knife, you can see folks, I've cut a new cork gasket and she's just running beautifully. I mentioned I put this battery on the charger last night, put on my C-Tech charger. Some of you know that I'm a big fan of the C-Tech battery chargers. You know, this battery I've owned probably about 3-4 years. I actually do take it home with me. The battery you saw me use in the Datsun first starting 20 years, so it's been home sitting for a few months. Just chucked it on the C-Tech charger. Those C-Tech chargers are pretty. Let's just see if we've got any circulation. Nah, she's not hot enough yet. Either that or the thermostat's stuck. But I think she'll be right. Folks, what I'm going to do now, we're going to chuck the air cleaner back on, and then let's think about taking this car for a bit of a cruise. Having sat for 12 months or so, I'm just going to check the tyre pressures now. that, folks, is my 1960 XK Falcon. You see me get it running today for the first time in 12 months and to take it for a little bit of a drive. Now, most of you will have noticed that it was running a little bit rough. I'm not particularly happy with the way it was running, but I don't have time to look into it further today. You saw me change the cork gasket on the front of the float bowl. I suspect that what I actually need to do is pull the carburetor apart and replace a bunch of the paper gaskets that are inside there. Basically do a little bit of a mini carburetor overhaul on it. Put fresh fuel, that didn't sort it out. So I'm gonna do that in a future video for you folks. The carburetor overhaul of this 1960 Falcon. And a few other things I'll mention that I'm planning to do on this vehicle. I've already replaced the master cylinder, as you saw earlier, but I haven't replaced the wheel cylinders, so that's something I'm going to be doing to this car. I'm going to replace all of the wheel cylinders in the car, so to make the brakes absolutely 100%. I might at the same time also replace the rubber brake lines. It's already had a complete flush, but I'll do another flush of brake fluid at the same time. And the other thing I am going to do, folks, is the water pump on this vehicle. As you noticed when I started it up, I commented about the cooling. It always has run a little bit hot. I suspect it is the original water pump from 1960. I've bought a new one, but I just haven't had time to fit it. So I'm going to be installing a new water pump on this 1960 Falcon and a new thermostat. I'll give it a complete coolant flush at the same time. So if those are things you're interested in, folks, subscribe to my channel. I'm interested in small motors, big motors, cars like this, and happy days.